Sarah Chen sat quietly in row 8, just another 11-year-old kid traveling alone. But when the pilot collapsed and the engine started failing at 8,000 feet, she did something nobody expected. She grabbed the radio microphone and said 5 words that changed everything: "I need help landing this plane." Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The morning sunlight streamed through the small windows of Cedar Valley Airport, casting long shadows across the tarmac. 11-year-old Sarah Chen adjusted her pink backpack on her shoulders and walked toward the tiny white and blue Cessna aircraft waiting on the runway. To everyone watching, the ground crew, the other passengers, the pilot himself, she was just another child. Small for her age, with her black hair tied neatly in a ponytail, wearing faded blue jeans and white sneakers that had seen better days, Sarah looked like she belonged in a classroom, not an airport. The adults smiled at her the way they always smiled at children traveling alone, a mixture of sympathy and mild concern. "Poor little thing," their expressions seemed to say. Flying all by herself. They had no idea that within the next 2 hours, this quiet 11-year-old girl would be the only thing standing between 6 people and certain death. Sarah climbed the narrow steps into the Cessna 72, ducking slightly as she entered the cramped cabin. The plane was nothing like the massive jets she'd seen in movies, with their spacious aisles and rows upon rows of seats. This aircraft had exactly 8 seats arranged in 4 rows, and it smelled like leather, aviation fuel, and the faint trace of someone's cologne. She made her way to the very back, row 8, and settled into her seat by the window. As she buckled her seatbelt and tucked her backpack under the seat in front of her, Sarah's eyes scanned the interior of the cockpit visible through the open door. She could see the instrument panel, the control yoke, the throttle quadrant. Her fingers twitched slightly, as if itching to touch those controls, to feel the weight of the yoke in her hands. "Hello there, sweetheart." Sarah looked up to see Captain Mike Torres walking toward her. He was about 45 years old, with graying hair and kind brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The gold stripes on his white shirt gleamed in the cabin light, marking him as a man with experience, with authority, with years of flying under his belt. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice warm and friendly. "Sarah Chen," she replied politely, her voice soft. "Well, Sarah, this is going to be a great flight today." Captain Torres pulled a small bag of peanuts from his pocket and offered it to her. "Have you ever been on a small plane before?" Sarah shook her head. "No, sir. This is my first time." The pilot's smile widened. "Don't worry about anything. I've been flying for 20 years, and I'll take good care of you." "Are you visiting family in Denver?" "Yes, sir. My grandmother lives there." What Sarah didn't tell Captain Torres, what she never told anyone, was that her father had been a pilot too. She didn't mention that he had died in a plane crash 2 years ago when she was only 9 years old. She didn't say anything about the cardboard box in her closet filled with his old aviation textbooks, flight manuals, and logbooks. She certainly didn't mention that she spent every night after homework studying those materials, absorbing every detail, every procedure, every emergency protocol. And she definitely didn't tell him about the flight simulator software on her tablet, not a simple game, but a professional-grade training program that had taught her how to start engines, read instruments, communicate with air traffic control, and handle in-flight emergencies. Captain Torres patted her shoulder gently. "You just sit back and enjoy the ride. If you need anything, just let me know. We should be in Denver in about 2 hours." As the pilot walked back to the cockpit, the other passengers began boarding the small aircraft. Mrs. Johnson arrived first, an elderly woman with perfectly styled white hair and a purple cardigan buttoned against the morning chill. She settled into row 6, 2 seats ahead of Sarah, and immediately turned around with a concerned expression. "Are you traveling by yourself, dear?" Mrs. Johnson asked, her voice colored with motherly worry. "How old are you?" "I'm 11, Sarah answered. "My mom put me on the plane, and my grandmother will pick me up in Denver." "Oh my goodness. Mrs. Johnson's hand flew to her chest. "You're so young to be flying alone. But don't worry, sweetheart, we'll all look after you." She rummaged through her large purse and produced a wrapped mint. "Would you like a candy? Flying sometimes makes your ears pop." Sarah accepted the mint with a polite, "Thank you," but inside she felt the familiar frustration that came with being 11 years old. Adults always assumed children knew nothing, understood nothing, could do nothing of importance. They saw her age and made instant judgments about her capabilities. If only they knew. Mr. Peterson boarded next, a businessman in his 30s wearing a crisp dark blue suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He took his seat in row 4 and glanced back at Sarah with a friendly grin. "Hey there, kiddo. First flight?" When Sarah nodded, he continued enthusiastically. "Well, you picked a beautiful day for it. Wait until you see the mountains from up here. It's like looking at a postcard." The last passengers were a young couple, Mr. and Mrs. Davis, who were clearly excited about their vacation in Colorado. They took seats in rows 2 and 3, waving at Sarah and asking if she was excited about her trip. Everyone meant well. They were all being kind. But as Sarah listened to their cheerful chatter, she understood something they didn't: they all saw her the same way. A small, quiet child who needed to be watched and protected. Someone who would probably be nervous during takeoff. Someone who might need help if anything went wrong. None of them, not a single one, could imagine that Sarah Chen had been secretly preparing for exactly this kind of situation for 2 full years. After her father's death, Sarah's mother had wanted to throw away all his aviation materials. "It's too painful," she had said, tears streaming down her face as she stood in the garage, holding a stack of flight manuals. "Every time I see these, I think about what we lost." But Sarah had begged to keep them. "Please, Mom. I just want something to remember him by." Her mother had relented, thinking Sarah just wanted mementos of her father. She had no idea that her daughter would spend the next 2 years studying those books with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Sarah didn't just read her father's aviation materials, she devoured them. She worked through dense technical manuals that most adults would find incomprehensible. She memorized emergency checklists, studied aerodynamic principles, learned about weather patterns and navigation systems. When she encountered terms she didn't understand, she searched online forums where real pilots discussed real problems. She downloaded flight simulator programs, not childish games, but sophisticated training tools used by actual student pilots. Night after night, while her mother thought she was playing games or watching cartoons, Sarah was practicing engine starts, emergency procedures, crosswind landings, and instrument failures. Her father had started teaching her about aviation before he died. He'd shown her the basic instruments, explained how wings generated lift, talked about the poetry of flight. "Knowledge doesn't care how old you are, Sarah," he used to say. "If you learn the right things and practice enough, you can do anything." After his death, those words became Sarah's guiding principle. She missed him every single day, but studying aviation made her feel close to him somehow. It helped her understand the world he had loved so passionately, the same world that had taken him away from her. Now, sitting in row 8 of this small Cessna, Sarah listened carefully to the sounds around her. She heard Captain Torres in the cockpit, his voice crisp and professional as he communicated with the control tower. She heard the click of switches being flipped, the hum of electrical systems coming online, the whir of gyroscopic instruments spinning up to speed. Most passengers would hear these as random airplane noises. Sarah heard them as a symphony of information. The engines coughed once, twice, then settled into a smooth, powerful rumble. Sarah recognized the sound immediately, a Lycoming O-320 engine producing 150 horsepower. From the pitch and rhythm, she could tell all 4 cylinders were firing correctly, the magnetos were functioning properly, and the engine was running at approximately 1,000 revolutions per minute for the ground check. Captain Torres's voice came over the intercom system, slightly distorted by the cheap speakers. "Good morning, everyone. This is your captain speaking. We're going to be taxiing out to the runway in just a moment. It's a beautiful day for flying, clear skies, light winds, perfect visibility. Our flight time to Denver will be approximately 2 hours. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. The Cessna began moving, and Sarah felt the familiar sensations she'd experienced countless times in her simulator, the slight bouncing of the wheels over uneven pavement, the way the aircraft wanted to weathervane in the crosswind, the gentle rocking motion as they taxied. Mrs. Johnson clutched her armrests nervously. Mr. Peterson was already focused on his laptop, probably preparing for a business meeting. The Davis couple held hands and smiled at each other, excited about their vacation. And Sarah? Sarah was mentally running through pre-takeoff checklists, her mind automatically processing everything she heard and felt. The engine sound changed as Captain Torres ran his final checks: magneto check, carburetor heat check, control surface check. Sarah could visualize exactly what he was doing in the cockpit, could picture his hands moving across the panel, verifying that every system was ready for flight. The aircraft turned onto the runway, and the engine roar increased dramatically. Sarah felt herself pressed back into her seat as they accelerated down the pavement, the runway lights flashing past her window faster and faster. She knew from her studies that they needed to reach approximately 65 knots before the wings would generate enough lift for takeoff. 50 knots, 55, 60. And then, smoothly, gracefully, the bumping stopped. They were airborne. Sarah watched through her window as the ground fell away. Buildings became toy-sized, roads turned into thin ribbons, and cars became tiny dots crawling along in slow motion. The morning sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Mrs. Johnson said, turning around with a smile. Her earlier nervousness had been replaced with wonder. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied. And it was beautiful. But Sarah was also noting their climb rate, estimating their altitude gain, listening to the engine tone for any irregularities. 20 minutes into the flight, everything was perfect. The Cessna cruised smoothly at 8,500 feet, the engine hummed contentedly, and the passengers had settled into their activities. Mr. Peterson typed away on his laptop. Mrs. Johnson had pulled out a paperback novel. The Davis couple dozed lightly, their heads resting together. Sarah had a book open on her lap, a young adult novel about wizards and magic, but her attention kept drifting to the cockpit. Through the open door, she could see the back of Captain Torres's head, could see his hands occasionally adjusting something on the panel. Then, at minute 23, something changed. It was subtle at first, so subtle that none of the other passengers noticed. But Sarah's ears, trained by thousands of hours listening to flight simulator sounds, picked up an irregularity in the engine noise. A slight roughness. A tiny hesitation in the rhythm. She sat up straighter, her book forgotten. A moment later, she heard Captain Torres's voice, but not over the intercom. He was talking to himself, his words barely audible. That's not right." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. Then she heard it clearly, a distinct change in the engine sound. The smooth roar became ragged, uneven. The aircraft shuddered slightly. Mrs. Johnson looked up from her book, confused. "Did we just hit turbulence?" Before anyone could answer, there was a sharp bang from the engine compartment, followed by a grinding noise that made Sarah's blood run cold. She'd heard that sound in her simulator dozens of times during emergency training scenarios. It was the sound of an engine failing. Captain Torres's voice came over the intercom, and for the first time, there was tension in it. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor technical issue. Please remain calm and keep your seatbelts fastened." But Sarah knew it wasn't minor. The engine was running roughly now, producing only partial power. The aircraft's nose had dropped slightly as their airspeed decreased. Mr. Peterson closed his laptop, suddenly alert. The Davis couple woke up, looking around nervously. Mrs. Johnson's knuckles turned white as she gripped her armrests. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. Sweetheart, sit down, Mrs. Johnson said urgently. The captain said to keep our seatbelts on. But Sarah wasn't listening. She was moving toward the cockpit, her mind racing through emergency procedures. Partial engine failure at cruise altitude. Check fuel selector. Check magnetos. Check throttle. Check mixture. If engine cannot be restored, prepare for emergency landing. She reached the cockpit door and looked inside. What she saw made her stomach drop. Captain Torres was slumped forward in his seat, his head against the control yoke, pushing it forward. The aircraft's nose was dropping more steeply now. The engine was still running, but roughly, producing less and less power with each passing second. And Captain Torres wasn't moving. Captain Torres? Sarah said, her voice cutting through the rising panic in the cabin behind her. No response. Captain. She reached forward and touched his shoulder. Still nothing. Sarah's mind went into overdrive. The pilot was unconscious. The engine was failing. The aircraft was descending. They were at 8,500 feet with rugged mountain terrain below them. She estimated they had maybe 10 to 12 minutes before they would hit the ground. Behind her, Mrs. Johnson screamed. Something's wrong with the pilot. Mr. Peterson stood up, pushing past the other passengers. Let me see. I did CPR training. But Sarah was faster. She squeezed past Captain Torres's seat and slid into the right-hand seat, the co-pilot's position. Her eyes swept across the instrument panel, taking in everything at once. Airspeed, decreasing through 85 knots. Altitude, 8,200 feet and dropping. Vertical speed, minus 500 feet per minute, descending. Heading, 0-45 degrees. Engine RPM, fluctuating between 1,800 and 2,200. Her hands moved to the control yoke, and she pulled back gently, raising the aircraft's nose to stop the descent. The yoke felt exactly like it did in her simulator, heavy, resistant, alive. What are you doing? Mr. Peterson shouted from behind her. You're just a kid. You can't fly a plane. Sarah ignored him. Her right hand found the radio transmit button on the yoke. She pressed it and spoke into the microphone, her voice remarkably steady despite her racing heart. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is Cessna November 478 Charlie. The pilot is unconscious, and I need help landing this plane. There was a moment of stunned silence on the radio. Then a male voice responded, professional but with an undertone of disbelief. Cessna 478 Charlie, say again your last transmission. Sarah took a breath. This is Sarah Chen. I'm 11 years old. The pilot, Captain Torres, is unconscious. I believe he's had a heart attack or medical emergency. The engine is also running rough, possible partial failure. I have basic flight training from simulators. I need guidance to land this aircraft safely. In the cabin behind her, the passengers were in various states of panic. Mrs. Johnson was praying loudly. Mrs. Davis was sobbing. Mr. Peterson stood frozen, his face pale with shock. But in the cockpit, Sarah Chen was absolutely calm. The radio crackled again. Cessna 478 Charlie, this is Denver Center. Stand by. A pause, then, Sarah, my name is Tom Bradley. I'm a certified flight instructor with 30 years of experience. I'm going to talk you through this. First, I need you to tell me, can you see the instruments? Can you reach the controls? Yes, sir, Sarah replied, her hand steady on the yoke. I'm in the right seat. I can see and reach everything. Excellent. Now, what's your current altitude? Sarah's eyes flicked to the altimeter. 8,000 feet. Descending at 400 feet per minute. And your airspeed? 90 knots. There was a pause on the radio. Tom Bradley was clearly impressed by how precisely she was reading the instruments. Very good, Sarah. Now, I need you to level off the aircraft. Pull back gently on the yoke until the vertical speed indicator shows 0. Already done, sir. We're level at 8,000 feet. Another pause. Sarah, where did you learn to fly? My father was a pilot. He taught me the basics before he died. Since then, I've been studying flight manuals and practicing on professional simulators. How many hours? In simulators? About 1,000 hours over 2 years. Even through the radio, Sarah could hear Tom Bradley's sharp intake of breath. 1,000 hours was more than many student pilots accumulated before their first solo flight. All right, Sarah. We're going to get you through this. First, tell me about the engine. What's happening? Sarah's eyes scanned the engine instruments. RPM is fluctuating between 1800 and 2200. Oil pressure is in the green but dropping slowly. Oil temperature is rising. Rough running, occasional backfiring. I think we have partial engine failure, possibly due to fuel contamination or magneto problems. Behind her, Mr. Peterson had finally found his voice. This is insane. She's 11 years old. She can't possibly. Sir, Sarah said, turning her head slightly without taking her eyes off the instruments, unless you're a pilot, I need you to sit down and let me focus. The authority in her voice, so unexpected from such a small girl, made Mr. Peterson stumble backward and drop into his seat. Tom Bradley's voice came through the radio again. Sarah, here's what we're going to do. I'm coordinating with Mountain View Airport, that's the nearest suitable landing field. It's about 40 miles southwest of your current position. I'm going to give you a heading to fly, and we're going to set up for an emergency landing. Understood. Ready for heading. Turn left to heading 220. Make it a gentle turn, no more than 15 degrees of bank. Sarah's left hand moved to the yoke, and she turned it slightly to the left. The artificial horizon tilted, showing the aircraft banking gently. The compass card rotated smoothly. When it reached 220 degrees, she leveled the wings. On heading 220, she reported. In the cabin, Mrs. Johnson had stopped praying and was now watching Sarah with something like awe. The Davis couple had stopped crying and were clutching each other, their eyes fixed on this small girl who was somehow flying their airplane. Sarah, you're doing remarkably well, Tom Bradley said. Now, I need you to check on Captain Torres. Can you reach him? Sarah leaned over and pressed her fingers against Captain Torres's neck, feeling for a pulse. Pulse is present but weak and irregular. He's breathing, but unconscious. I think it's a heart attack. All right. There's nothing you can do for him right now except fly the airplane. That's your priority. Flying the airplane. Can you repeat that back to me? Flying the airplane is my priority. Good. Now, listen carefully. We have medical personnel standing by at Mountain View Airport. Fire trucks and ambulances are positioning themselves along the runway. You're going to have every possible resource available when you land. If you land, Sarah's mind whispered. But she pushed that thought away. Sarah, Tom Bradley continued, I want you to reduce your power setting. Pull back on the throttle, that's the black knob in the center of the panel, until the RPM drops to about 1500. Sarah's hand found the throttle. She pulled it back smoothly, and the engine noise decreased. The RPM gauge settled at 1500. Good. This will help conserve what's left of the engine and give us more time to set up for landing. Now, what's your altitude? 7,800 feet. Perfect. Maintain that altitude until I tell you otherwise. For the next several minutes, Tom Bradley walked Sarah through a series of checks and procedures. He had her verify the fuel selector was on the fuller tank. He had her check that the mixture control was properly set. He guided her through switching between the dual magnetos to see if that would smooth out the engine. Nothing helped. The engine continued running roughly, threatening to quit entirely at any moment. "Sarah," Tom said, his voice serious, "I need you to understand something. This engine might quit completely before you reach the airport. If that happens, you'll need to glide the aircraft. Do you understand what that means?" "Yes, sir. Without engine power, the aircraft becomes a glider. Best glide speed for a Cessna 172 is 65 knots. At this altitude, I should have a glide range of approximately 9 to 10 miles per 1,000 feet of altitude." There was another long pause. Then Tom Bradley said quietly, "Sarah, you're one remarkable young lady." In the cabin, Mr. Peterson had his phone out, recording video. Mrs. Johnson was leaning forward, watching Sarah's every move. The Davis couple sat perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might disturb the incredible thing happening in the cockpit. "Mountain View Airport is now 25 miles ahead," Tom Bradley reported. "You should be able to see it soon. Look for a cluster of buildings and a runway." Sarah scanned the horizon. Mountains surrounded them on three sides, their peaks still covered with snow despite the late spring weather. Below, she could see winding roads, scattered houses, and patches of forest. Then she saw it, a small airport nestled in a valley, looking impossibly tiny from this altitude. "I see the airport," she reported. "Good. Now we're going to start our descent. I want you to reduce your altitude by 500 feet per minute. Lower the nose slightly until your vertical speed indicator shows -500. Sarah pushed forward gently on the yoke. The nose dropped, and she felt her stomach lift slightly as the aircraft began descending. -500 feet per minute, she confirmed. The airport was getting larger now, the runway becoming more visible. Sarah could see vehicles gathering along its edges, fire trucks, ambulances, police cars. All waiting for her. "Sarah, I need you to stay focused," Tom Bradley said, as if reading her thoughts. "Don't think about the people waiting. Don't think about the pressure. Just focus on flying the airplane. One step at a time. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Now, as we get closer, I'm going to walk you through the landing procedures. It's going to be different from anything you've done in a simulator. The real controls will feel heavier. The wind will affect you. The runway will come up faster than you expect. But if you follow my instructions exactly, you're going to be fine." Sarah didn't respond. She was too busy flying, monitoring instruments, maintaining heading, controlling descent rate, listening to the rough engine, feeling the aircraft's responses through the controls. She had trained for this moment without knowing she was training for it. Every hour in the simulator, every page of every manual, every video tutorial, every forum discussion, it all came down to this. Row 8 of a small aircraft. An unconscious pilot. A failing engine. And an 11-year-old girl who refused to let anyone die. 10 miles out, Tom Bradley announced. "Altitude? 6,000 feet. You're right on target. Now, Sarah, I want you to start thinking about your approach. The runway is oriented east-west. Based on current winds, you'll be landing on runway 09, which means you'll approach from the west, flying toward the east." Sarah's mind instantly visualized the approach, the turn to final, the descent angle, the flare before touchdown. "Beginning turn to final approach," she said, her hands moving the controls with surprising confidence. Behind her, the cabin had gone completely silent. Everyone was holding their breath. And in the cockpit, Sarah Chen, just a kid in row 8, just a small girl with a pink backpack, just another passenger the adults had ignored, was doing the impossible. She was bringing them home. 5 miles out, Tom Bradley's voice was steady, professional, but Sarah could detect the underlying tension. "Reduce power slightly. Start configuring for landing." Sarah's hand moved to the throttle, pulling it back another inch. The engine coughed, sputtered, and for one heart-stopping moment, she thought it would quit entirely. But it caught again, running even more roughly than before. "Engine's getting worse," she reported calmly. "I know, Sarah. But you're almost there. 3 miles now. Lower your flaps to the first position." Sarah found the flap lever on the panel. She'd seen it hundreds of times in her simulator. She moved it to the first notch. Immediately, the aircraft's nose pitched up, and the plane slowed. Sarah compensated by pushing forward on the yoke, maintaining her descent angle. "Good," Tom said. "How does it feel?" "Different from the simulator. Heavier. But I've got it. 2 miles. You're lined up perfectly with the runway. Lower flaps to second position." Sarah moved the lever again. The aircraft slowed further, becoming more stable in its descent. Through the windscreen, she could now see individual people on the ground, all watching the sky, all watching her. The runway numbers, 09, were clearly visible now, painted in massive white letters on the dark asphalt. 1 mile. "Sarah, this is it. I need you to listen very carefully to everything I say." "I'm listening." "You're going to aim for the numbers at the beginning of the runway. As you get close to the ground, maybe 10 or 15 feet up, you're going to pull back gently on the yoke. This is called the flare. It will slow your descent and let you touch down softly." "Understood." "Half mile. Looking good. Airspeed?" 70 knots. "Perfect. Quarter mile now. Start thinking about your flare." The ground was rushing up to meet them. Sarah could see every detail, the runway markings, the fire trucks positioned along the sides, the ambulance waiting with its doors open, the crowd of people watching. Her hands gripped the yoke. Her feet rested on the rudder pedals, ready to keep the aircraft straight during landing. Every muscle in her body was tense, but her movements remained smooth and controlled. 100 feet, Tom Bradley said. 50 feet. "Get ready, Sarah. Start your flare, now." Sarah pulled back gently on the yoke. The nose came up. The descent slowed. For a moment, they seemed to float just above the runway surface. "Hold it off, hold it off." The main wheels kissed the runway with barely a bump. Sarah held the nose up until it settled down on its own. They were on the ground, rolling straight down the centerline. "Brakes!" Tom shouted. Top of the rudder pedals. Sarah's feet pushed down on the brake pedals. The aircraft slowed rapidly. Within seconds, they rolled to a complete stop, still on the runway. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then Tom Bradley's voice crackled over the radio, and Sarah could hear the emotion breaking through his professional composure. "Cessna 478 Charlie, welcome to Mountain View Airport. That was one of the finest emergency landings I have ever witnessed." The cabin erupted in chaos. Mrs. Johnson was crying and laughing simultaneously. Mr. Peterson was shouting, "She did it. She actually did it." The Davis couple were hugging each other and cheering. But Sarah just sat in the pilot's seat, her hands still on the yoke, breathing deeply, letting the adrenaline slowly drain from her system. Within seconds, the aircraft was surrounded by emergency vehicles. Paramedics rushed to the cockpit, immediately attending to Captain Torres. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up on shaky legs, making room for the medical team. "He's breathing," one paramedic announced. "Pulse is stabilizing. Probable cardiac event. Let's get him to the hospital now." As Sarah climbed down from the aircraft, she was immediately surrounded by firefighters, paramedics, airport personnel, and reporters who had somehow already arrived on scene. A tall man with gray hair pushed through the crowd. Tom Bradley. He looked at Sarah for a long moment, then extended his hand formally. "Sarah Chen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I've been flying and teaching flying for over 30 years. I have never seen anyone, adult or child, handle an emergency with such skill and composure. Your father would be incredibly proud of you." Sarah shook his hand, and for the first time since the crisis began, she felt tears forming in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I just did what he taught me to do." A reporter pushed a microphone toward her. "Sarah, how did you know how to fly an airplane?" Sarah took a breath, thinking about her answer. "My dad was a pilot. He taught me that anyone can learn anything if they really want to. He said flying isn't magic, it's just physics and procedures. If you study hard enough and practice enough, you can do things that other people think are impossible." The story spread like wildfire. Within hours, Sarah's emergency landing was national news. News helicopters had captured footage of the landing. Mr. Peterson's video from inside the cabin went viral on social media. Major networks wanted interviews. But through all the attention, Sarah remained humble and focused on the facts. When reporters asked if she felt like a hero, she said simply, "I don't feel like a hero. I feel like someone who was prepared when preparation was needed." When they asked what advice she had for other children, she replied, "Learn things. Study things you're interested in. Even if adults tell you you're too young to understand, you never know when that knowledge might be important." Captain Torres made a full recovery from his heart attack. When he was released from the hospital 3 days later, his first request was to meet Sarah. They sat together in the airport terminal, the experienced pilot and the 11-year-old girl who had saved his life. "Thank you," he said simply, tears in his eyes. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for knowing what to do." Sarah's mother arrived from Denver that same evening, crying with relief and pride. "I had no idea you knew so much about flying," she said, hugging Sarah tightly. "I wanted to learn about Dad's world," Sarah explained. "I know flying took him away from us, but it was also what he loved most. I wanted to understand why." 6 months later, Sarah received her student pilot certificate, making her one of the youngest people in Colorado ever to begin official flight training. Tom Bradley became her instructor, and they flew together every weekend. The FAA used her story in training materials to emphasize the importance of aviation education and emergency preparedness. Aviation magazines called her landing a textbook example of airmanship under pressure. But the recognition that meant the most to Sarah came from other pilots. Wherever she went in the aviation community, experienced pilots treated her not as a child who got lucky, but as a fellow aviator who had proven herself when it mattered most. Sarah continued to excel in both school and aviation. She joined the Civil Air Patrol, volunteered at air shows, and gave speeches about aviation safety. She never forgot the lesson she had learned that day at 8,000 feet. Age doesn't determine capability. Preparation meets opportunity. And sometimes, the person everyone underestimates turns out to be exactly the person everyone needs. Years later, when Sarah earned her commercial pilot license at age 18, one of the youngest in the country, reporters asked her about that day when she was just 11 years old, sitting in row 8 of a small Cessna. "What were you thinking," they asked, "when you realized you had to land that plane?" Sarah smiled, remembering her father's words. "I was thinking that knowledge doesn't care how old you are. I was thinking that I had studied for this moment even though I didn't know it would come. And I was thinking that my dad was right, if you learn the right things and practice enough, you can do anything." She paused, looking up at the sky where a small plane traced a path through the clouds. "Even things that other people think are impossible.